Now, this video has been in the making for a really long time, but I haven't been able to post it because Katakawa was slamming anyone that made rezero videos with copyright strikes. It's a miracle my video on episode 15 is still public, but hopefully things stay that way. Making this video is really risky because I don't know if the environment for making rezero videos is safe yet, but honestly, I really don't care because I really need to spread my love for this show. In the last video, I said I'd cover the events of episode 18, which is exactly what we're going to do today. Episode 18 is one of my favorite episodes out of all of anime, minus all the memes surrounding it, of course. But to understand the significance of this episode, we're going to need to take a look at prior episodes first. I have a video on episode 15, so I won't be covering it here, and we'll be starting with episode 16. If you haven't already seen my episode 15 video on the Outside of Madness, there will be a card on the screen right now, and you should go check that out. Subaru's pride was pretty fragile before the events of episode 15, and had begun a downward spiral ever since the end of the royal selection, where he embarrassed both himself and the Emilia camp really badly. I still, to this day, cannot watch the royal selection without secondhand cringing out of my mind, because good lord, Subaru does not make good decisions here. Episodes 15, 16, and 17 would really continue to challenge and shatter whatever bit of pride and confidence Subaru had left. Episode 15 was when he experienced the death of almost literally everyone he cares about, and then after looping he proceeds to lay idle and watch them die brutally in attempts to save him, and then he sees everyone's dead bodies again, for the second time in one episode. However, thanks to his death, he learns that the witch's cult is at large behind this event, so he tries to rally people to help with this new knowledge. He tries his hardest to negotiate with Krush, which results in her saying that her help would result in Emilia's withdrawal from the royal selection. She says her family will offer no help to him at all, and he is instead called a member of the witch's cult by her. She even goes as far to call him a madman for believing the things that he's saying to her about the witch's cult and him attacking and everything. All of this is said in a really condescending manner, so on top of Subaru's negotiation failing horribly, he is talked down on, which likely extremely damages any sense of pride he would have had in this instance. After this, he abandons the Krush manor and he looks elsewhere for help. He finds himself at Priscilla's manor, where she doesn't even attempt to take him seriously at all. She calls him a jester and says she's better off chopping his head off. And then she asks him to lick her toes. Ew, oh, that's disgusting. Why would, ew. What's even worse is that he goes in to do it. He almost does it, since he thinks this will help him out with his negotiation, but then she kicks the shit out of him while calling him an insignificant man. This likely really damages his pride, as he almost went through with an incredibly embarrassing act. God, Subaru, that would have been really disgusting. I'm so glad you didn't do that. And then he got kicked by her, and he got kicked out by her. Although he's too stubborn to accept this, calling her a stuck-up bitch, saying she owes him a debt for saving her, which, if you recall, he really didn't save her. All he did was threaten to call Reinhardt on a situation that seemed to be pretty under control already. And I believe this is him trying to mend any bit of pride or any bit of confidence that might be a little bit damaged. He believes he saved her because he believes he saves everyone, and that everyone owes him some sort of debt. These are big copium moments, my dudes. Miraculously, he then runs into Anastasia Hojin after this, who is yet another royal candidate. This entire conversation on the surface appears to go very poorly, but he actually learns a lot from her. It's through Anastasia that Subaru learns how to properly negotiate. She teaches him how to negotiate with someone in power, where to effectively talk to someone into taking deals, and to be prepared with what the other wants before you go to talk to them. Anastasia agrees to give Subaru the location of a dragon-drawn carriage in exchange for a conversation with him, and in which we have one of the cutest cat-human hybrids in the form of Mimi. Seriously, she's just so cute. And the way she eats that burger, that's just too much for my heart. Anyways, though, they talk about the state of the capital and how when the people at the top move, the people at the bottom also move. They talk about how iron supplies have been dwindling too, and Subaru accidentally lets it spill who has been visiting Krush's domain, like Russell Fellow. This is when Anastasia gives him the dragon-drawn carriage information, and it turns out he was set up to drop information that she needed about the state of the capital from the very start. This entire conversation, she was just using him. After this, she insults Subaru's intelligence, his reputation, and she also also calls him powerless by saying there's nothing he can do. I can only imagine how Subaru feels here, as not only did he get duped, but he's also being subconsciously reminded how powerless he feels in his current situation. So, all in all, Subaru took 3 attempts to try and get someone to go and save the mansion, and all 3 attempts failed and resulted in him basically being laughed at and being looked down on, which to any person would really suck. But given how things have gone lately for Subaru, you know, kind of dying and watching a lot of other people dying, this probably must have been a gut punch after gut punch for him. He learned the hard way that every person in this world has their own agenda and their own goals, and that in the grand scheme of things, he might not even really matter at all, which this is quite the powerful message, as this is something any person could apply to their life. However, they are able to get the dragon-drawn carriage, and thanks to Anastasia's advice, Subaru is able to meet and successfully negotiate with Otto and the other merchants. He offers to buy all their products as long as they'll help transport the people from the Mathers domain out of trouble. Way to go, Subaru! Let's go, buddy! Already putting what you learned into practice, although he's still got a long way to go at this point in time. They get a ride from the people to the Rosewall Mansion, and as they're passing Flugel's tree, trouble hits! Subaru's witch miasma has attracted one of the legendary demon beasts, in this case being the white whale. Just when we thought things were finally going well. But I mean, this is rezero, so I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. This thing's appearance is so sudden, and honestly pretty terrifying. A flying whale that quite literally wipes people from existence? Yeah, no thanks, I'm good. I also love how it just cuts so well from the white whale to the opening, which, by the way, Paradis Paradoxium is my favorite rezero opening. Myth and Royd really outdid themselves with this one, and it gives so much atmosphere for the world. It's quite literally the most perfect opening for Arc 3, and it's one of my favorite openings of all time. I absolutely love it. Anyways, Rem protects the gang as much as she can, even saving Subaru a few times, but they can't seem to shake the whale off of their course. With them running out of options, Rem gives all of the gold to Subaru and plans to stop the whale herself. Subaru and Rem embrace in a hug as she says she feels she was born for this very moment, and then knocks him out and leaps from the carriage. For the second time in this arc, Rem has once again sacrificed herself for Subaru's sake. There is actually quite a bit to digest here about Rem's sacrifice, so let's go back over it, shall we? Subaru was driven by mostly rage towards the witches cult, Betelgeuse, and honestly, maybe even the world. He was extremely emotionally unstable, but despite this, they tried to carry on the plan of saving the village and Emilia. However, once Subaru had woken up from being knocked out by Rem, he almost wanted to abandon his plan completely to go and save Rem, as he didn't want one of the only people that has ever loved him in his life to have died for nothing. Otto tries to inform him that naturally, his decision is stupid because the whale had killed the master's swordsman, which was the strongest swordsman in their world. But all this does is speak volumes of the situation they're in. Rem knew how hopeless fighting the white whale was by herself because of what it did to the swordsman, yet she completely trusted in Subaru as a person and his plan to save everyone. This is on top of the fact that earlier this episode, she expressed a bit of doubt that the witches cult would attack due to Subaru's lack of proof, and having dealt with some of his irrational behaviors. Despite all of that, her love and trust in Subaru was so strong that she was willing to ignore everything to make sure that he survived and saw his plan through. Naturally, anyone would want to honor these intense feelings and try to make sure their sacrifice was not in vain, but that is when Subaru is almost entirely smacked in the face with irony. Despite Otto just having talked about Rem and her sacrifice, Otto suddenly forgets who Rem is entirely. This is where we have the first instance of who is Rem, out of many, which, by the way, is a really overused joke. Come on guys, get some new content. I'm sick of hearing this everywhere. So after losing one of the only people in his life that has ever loved him, and her existence being forgotten by Otto, this would naturally break his mental state quite a bit, especially Subaru's given how much he's been going through. His mental likely takes an even bigger dive for the worse when Otto suddenly forgets about Rem, which we are shown quite a bit of how much this troubles him. He punches Otto and gets extremely violent very quickly, expressing how upset he is that he talks highly about her sacrifice 1 second, and then the next he completely forgets about her. A situation that was already bad has suddenly gotten way worse, and continues to get worse at every growing second. The whale is still hot on their case, and it shows no signs of stopping. And that's when Subaru realizes it's a mob beast. He realizes he's the reason it won't leave them alone, and he is the reason for Rem's death. Before he even has time to let the gravity of his revelation sink in, Otto does what no character has done in this series yet. He sacrifices Subaru to save himself. This is likely a massive reality check for Subaru, as nothing remotely close had ever happened like this before. Normally, he was the hero that came to save the day and those that he cared about. But now he was being used as bait to save a merchant's life. This probably hits the nail on the head for the message he received through the royal selection candidates. Subaru doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Otto was a character with his own agenda and his own life to live. Subaru was used as a pawn to aid in Otto's survival. To Otto, Subaru did not matter at all. He was merely a passing face. Subaru then lies in disarray as the beast looks over him in an absolutely terrifying and helpless-inducing shot, and then he proceeds to run and beg for his life. Now, I know that Subaru has died a lot, but watching him still beg to not die as he's running and crying is just really depressing. However, weirdly enough, the beast just disappears as randomly as it appeared. Subaru ends up miraculously living. That's very strange, but you know what? We take those. Thanks to him somehow surviving, Subaru trudges towards the mansion and finds Otto's guard dragon, where it appears he was murdered by the witch's cult. This is when Subaru has time to let everything settle in truly, which I imagine could not be anything easy to take in at all. After suffering a lot of physical damage from being pushed off a moving cart and running from a giant flying whale, he also has to come to terms with being the complete cause of Rem's death. Rem would not have died if Subaru had not have been there to attract the white whale. This is also likely on top of the fact that he feels the need to not have had her death be a waste, causing him to hit a point of extreme desperation that we will see taking effect later on. They arrive in the Mather's domain with him completely beat up, and here he runs into Petra and the kids. He made it in time. The first time he made it before the cult attacked. He then passes out and wakes back up in the bed he initially woke up in. You know, the one he did back when he came to this domain for the first time. For a second, upon waking up, he mistakes Ram for Rem. So while this loop around he did make it in time, Rem is gone. And to make matters worse, no one in the mansion even remembers her. Not even her own sister remembers her, which the crying Subaru is shocked by. Even her room has been changed to fit the narrative of her having never existed. This, I imagine, is something extremely painful. You have to experience the death of someone that meant so much to you, but completely alone, because no one can really understand or sympathize with you. This right here is true pain. However, despite this turn of events, Subaru is determined to not run and he goes to confront Emilia. Subaru tries to get her to leave with him, but Emilia sees this as a repeat of what she was concerned about earlier, which is Subaru getting himself hurt and in trouble using Emilia's safety as an excuse. She even notes that he didn't used to be this way and that he's changed since he last saw her, and she seems genuinely scared by how he's acting. This is likely due to how sporadic, demanding, and desperate acting he is now, compared to the calmer acting and more caring Subaru from before. Subaru pleads with her heavily, but she turns him down and says she has work to do. This entire scene is likely Subaru realizing the after effects of his prior actions, and now how distant Emilia seems to be emotionally and mentally from Subaru for her own safety. However, he realizes that despite all of the suffering he's gone through since he last saw her, that nothing has really changed, and he's made no progress. It's after this that Subaru goes into a fit of rage, where he's projecting his pains onto her. He says it won't work, and that she'll fail, that she can't do it, and that it's no use, that she's all talk, and that she can't save anyone or be saved, that she'll keep acting rashly and unreasonably until she sees as many corpses to match the amount of reckless decisions she's made. All of this is just what Subaru thinks about himself. He realizes he's been rash, and he's been unreasonable. He realizes that everything that's happening is his fault for how he acted at the royal selection, and now he's paying for his actions and continuing to make bad decisions. He's clearly very affected from seeing everyone dead, and he doesn't know what to do, as he says that this is your future, as if he knows everything will go horribly wrong again. These few lines from Subaru show how fragile his mental state has gotten after dealing with Betelgeuse and the witch's cult. Seeing everyone die and losing Rem 3 times now, and after being treated like a child by the royal candidates, Subaru is realizing, in possibly the hardest and most relatable way, the error in his actions. Emilia realizes this, saying he's crying as if he's in extreme pain, and Subaru brings up Rem, which to everyone's surprise, Emilia also doesn't remember who she is. It's after this that Subaru is determined to tell Emilia absolutely everything, since despite what has happened between them, it's clear that Emilia still wants to try and trust him. Since he lost the girl that loved him, and he's gone through a lot of trauma, he decides that he has had enough suffering and will tell the girl he loves the truth. She believes in him, and he wants to give her reasons to continue to, so he begins to spill the beans about return by death. Naturally, the hands of the witch show up again, but despite what normally happens, where the hands go to threaten his physical health to keep him from talking, they instead caress his heart. This is bizarre, and even Subaru realizes as such. But before he has time to think, Emilia falls forward, and blood is coming out of her mouth. That's right, Emilia is fucking dead. Emilia's death in this instance seems to be due completely to the Witch of Envy. What happened here was that she normally threatens Subaru's heart, right? But it's clear that this time, that would not have stopped him from telling Emilia. Subaru has completely decided to tell her the truth and to end his suffering. He had been through a lot of pain, and he had seen a lot of things. So he decided in his heart that no amount of pain that the witch would put him through would be as bad as what he had been going through. So since her threat held no weight to him, she instead killed Emilia to keep their secret from coming out, and to continue Subaru's suffering. Despite Subaru being ready to tell Emilia the truth, the Witch of Envy was not ready for that truth to come out. The power that he bears does not want Subaru's suffering to stop just yet, and it will instead kill off those that he loves. This scene is blatantly telling Subaru that if his resolve and goal is not to save himself, but to save someone else, then the witch will continue to kill those he loves. So, yeah, Emilia is fucking dead now. I bet no one saw that coming on their first watch through of this series, because I certainly didn't see that coming. Subaru holds Emilia's body in a traumatized state for hours, and then Betty appears. He asks her to kill him, but she tells him that he knows nothing and refuses to kill him. This is actually a dramatic irony, as not even 11 minutes ago, Subaru was begging to not be killed by the white whale. Now, here he is, begging to die. This episode as a whole has served as the final nail in the coffin to breaking Subaru's mental state. 2 episodes ago, he witnessed Rem brutally die and the harshness of the witch's cult. Then he was given the harsh reality of how insignificant he can be in this world, and he doesn't understand it. Now, he lost the person he loved, and the person who loved him in 1 episode. After all of this, he is almost killed by the witch's cult, and then Puck shows up like Gilgamesh from Fate and kills the cult. He's then revealed to be the monster from the mansion in episode 15, and then is frozen by Puck and he is killed. While he's dying, Subaru begins to hear maniacal laughter, and says it belongs to the man he hates the most. That's when he realizes that the laughter is coming from himself. This is when Subaru says he let Rem die, he was the cause for Emilia's death, and now he was going to die in vain, seemingly having accomplished nothing. This is the moment that Subaru's will completely shatters, and he calls himself slothful. He failed to save everyone for a 3rd time, embarrassed himself heavily in front of all the royal candidates, and was the leading factor in not only Rem's death, but Emilia's death too. He has suffered so much mental anguish and physical pain that he simply just cannot take it anymore. This is the turning point of rezero, where Subaru has hit an extreme all-time low, and any ounce of faith or pride in himself completely disappears. After becoming a Subaru popsicle, he responds back at the Apple shop. He goes into a dazed, dreamlike state upon seeing Rem, and then he goes into a panic. He grabs her hand and he starts running, and he keeps running. His panic ends up freaking out Rem, causing her to ask him to stop and to calm down. After this, they move to higher ground to talk. This is where this entire episode takes place. And with that, we have finally covered everything we need to talk about for episode 18. One of the reasons I absolutely love this episode is because how powerful it managed to make a conversation between 2 characters, which all happens in a single location. It's very reminiscent of a movie like 12 Angry Men, which has its entire runtime take place in a jury's office, or an anime example would be Monogatari, as nearly every episode in Monogatari is a 24-minute conversation. This entire episode is also directed as if it was meant to be part of a play in a theater production, and it's very noticeable at some points, but really helps to increase the enjoyability with this episode. Another thing that's worth noting is that this is the first rezero episode that skips both the opening and the ending, without playing either of them or even showing their visuals. And it's also the first ReZero episode to run over the typical 24-minute mark. This is a trend they would end up following for literally almost every episode in season 2 of the series, and is another part of what really makes this episode so much more hard-hitting. Anyways, enough talk about the production for this episode, let's get to actually talking about it. Subaru apologizes to Rem about freaking out like that, while occasionally throwing in some self-deprecating comments such as him being pathetic and depressed all the time. He goes on to say that he has bothered a lot of people with his contemplating and agonizing, but he's figured out how to take care of everything, which he's surprised he didn't do sooner, since he claims the answer was told to him from the very start, but he doesn't know when to give up. Rem disagrees, saying that she thinks his inability to give up is a wonderful trait of his. Being complimented right here seems to bug Subaru a little bit, which is because his psyche likely is under the impression he doesn't deserve to hear such things, or that she's just saying that to make him feel better. Subaru then says he's come to realize this is the only answer over time recently, and that he's come to a decision. Rem seems completely shocked upon hearing Subaru's decision, since this is likely extremely out of character for the person she believes she knows. Not only is he running away and giving up, but he's also taking her instead of the one she knows he loves, which is Emilia. While Subaru is explaining his plan, Rem continually tries to speak her mind, and Subaru continues trying to explain until Rem is finally able to put some words in. She expresses her concern for what Subaru is saying as them fleeing the country, but then says that this must be part of a great idea he's had to help Rosewall or Emilia. Subaru immediately tells her what she is thinking is not at all what he is intending to do, and this is where a lot of Subaru's inner thoughts finally begin to pour out. He says there's nothing he can do here in the capital, and he'd be just as powerless if he went back to the mansion. The expression on his face is openly showing how much Subaru has given up with how somber he looks, asking Rem once again to run away with him. This is when he expresses that the answer that was right in front of him this whole time was everyone around him telling him that he can't be there. Rem goes again to tell him that he's got it wrong, but Subaru shuts her down, claiming that it is true. We then are shown all the clips that have led him to thinking this way, which is his fight with Emilia at the Royal Selection, his quarrel with Julius, him being played by all of the Royal Selection candidates, and every time he's seen someone die through the Witch's Cult, including Rem, as he says anything he does will lead to a dead body. Subaru acknowledges that he's done as much as he could, and that he just wants to leave. Then Subaru gives Rem a decision: go with him or choose someone else. We then are given a brief shot of silence between the two, where Rem gives a moment to think, since she realizes her answer or her next few words will likely be really important and set the tone for the rest of their conversation. She then answers and tells him that she cannot run away with him. Rem likely says this because yes, while she does love Subaru immensely and wants him to return her feelings, this is not the way she wants it to happen. Subaru is going against core ideals that in her mind and her heart make up who he is, such as not running away, or wanting to save people, or wanting the best for people around him. Here, he's abandoning people and running away from not only the Emilia camp, but the entire country. Rem likely doesn't want this. She then goes on to somewhat confirm this as she says they're supposed to laugh about the future, implying that she doesn't want this because the future Subaru wants seems to be an extreme last resort for him. Nothing to laugh or smile about. Subaru tries to deflect, saying that they might not be laughing now, but they will be later. However, Rem cuts him off, saying that she's thought about their future together too. She then goes on to describe how she imagines life would be as they blossomed love for each other, which this future does play out almost exactly in the Sloth If novels for ReZero. The If stories are basically events that could have happened in ReZero, and the Sloth story is where Rem agrees to run away with Subaru and they start a family together. We also see some flashes of these scenes animated in Season 2, although they are only brief and their meaning is something that can be debated. Anyways, Rem describes their future in an extremely wholesome and loving manner, even talking about possibly having children together, saying that she's sure they wouldn't be all fun times and there would be hardships. She even makes a joke about the family being all girls and Subaru possibly not being proud of his family for having no sons. Rem then says that she imagines they would be famous in the neighborhood for being a couple of old lovebirds, happily spending the rest of their life together and growing old. I personally think this is ridiculously adorable how much passion she shows in her love for Subaru. Naturally, he pleads with her that if she wants this future so badly, then she should go with him. But this is when Rem confirms that she would do it if Subaru could wish for that future with a smile, and that if she runs away with him now, that she would be leaving behind the Subaru that she loves the most. Rem then asks him to please tell him what happened and to trust her. But Subaru starts to go into a panic again, as he thinks this spells the end of this loop, as a flash of Rem dying comes onto the screen, and a scene of Puck before he goes to destroy the world also appears. Rem says they can come to a different decision together about this, but naturally Subaru says he's already thought and agonized about this decision. This is when Rem accidentally strikes a nerve, telling him that it's easy to give up. Subaru knows the hell he's gone through up until this point, experiencing failure after failure after failure, and death after death after death. He expresses how it might seem like he's not thinking about anything, and just cutting himself off from everything for no reason. That Subaru thought to himself that it was easier for there to be something he could do, rather than to give up. He then tells her that there is nothing that he can do, and he has no choice but to give up as he thinks about Rem's death from episode 15, Emilia's death from episode 17, and his death to Puck earlier this episode. It's after this that Rem affirms again that it's easy to give up, but giving up doesn't suit Subaru. That while it might be disingenuous of her to say this despite her not understanding completely what he's going through, but she knows he's someone who cannot give up halfway through, and that Subaru is someone who can smile when he talks about his wishes for the future, as she remembers their talk back from episode 11. This is the first part in this episode that I believe Rem really shines, as it's very clear how much of an impact Subaru has had on her. Their dichotomy here is actually genius writing if you ask me, as Rem was in Subaru's shoes when we first met her. Rem hated herself deeply, since she was somewhat neglected and useless as a child. She would have been killed as a baby if not for Rem protecting her. Then, Rem held herself accountable for her village and her parents dying, and Rem losing her demon horn. To make her sour feelings even worse, instead of being sad initially when Rem lost her horn, she smiled and was happy, thinking that it was finally gone. She had to marinate with those feelings of guilt and sadness for years, thinking she was a miserable person that didn't deserve to be happy due to her past mistakes and her shortcomings. She would do anything she could to try and atone for what she had done, such as doing twice the amount of work that she really had to do to make up for robbing Rem of her horn. This mindset is what led to her killing Subaru several times, since she suspected him of being evil or wanting to hurt those that she cared about. However, it was Subaru who ended up being the one that saved her. He went out of his way to save her from the mob beasts, to which Rem almost got him killed for hesitating to save him, and to atone for this she went to fight them alone, and once again she was saved by Subaru. Rem says that everything is in vain if they help her, and that she is making the same sin again, to which Subaru headbutts her, calls her stupid for thinking that way, and saying that they should rely on each other for help and to think. This is almost the direct opposite of what's happening now, where Subaru is being stupid and Rem is telling him to rely on her and think with her. And then after this, when Subaru woke up from the mob beast's attack, Rem opens up to Subaru about being an inferior replacement to Rem and being a Demon Clan dropout, that she's good for nothing. She then apologizes for opening up and asks him to forget it, but Subaru instead says that she keeps putting Rem on a pedestal when she's weaker mentally, she can't cook, she slacks off, and she does mean things. Rem says he's wrong, and he doesn't know the true Rem, which is her with her horn. And Subaru says that only she knows that version of Rem, since Rem doesn't have her horn anymore. I think this is particularly interesting because, once again, this could be applied to what's happening currently in episode 18. Subaru hates himself, and he wants to give up because of a Subaru that Rem doesn't know. So it's a version only Subaru knows of himself. After this, Subaru tells Rem that he's glad she was there for him. Rem doesn't seem to understand, once again saying she's just a replacement for Rem, but Subaru says that no one could replace Rem. Subaru then says demons are supposed to laugh when they talk about the future, and that while they talk, that Rem should look forward to make up for the time she spent looking backwards. Rem says she's very weak, so she's sure she'll end up leaning on Subaru, and like the Chad he is, Subaru says what's wrong with that? They can lean on each other as much as they need to move forward. It's always been a dream of his to talk about next year with a demon while they both laugh. This is when the budget hit hard on episode 11 of Rem crying, and she says, seriously, every time I watch this scene, I find myself crying too. Between the voice actress's work and the animation and the soundtrack, God, I love you, Rem. Oh, I really love you, Rem. But essentially, Subaru freed Rem's heart from a decade's worth of torment. Subaru saved Rem when no one else could. Now, here we are, where Rem is the only one who can save Subaru when no one else can. Everything comes full circle. Alright, let's get back to episode 18 now. I'm sorry for the quick detour, but I feel like talking about episode 11 was really important for talking about what's going on here in episode 18 right now. Anyways, Subaru says that not giving up on anyone isn't true. Rem interrupts him by saying that it is true, and then lists everyone that he has never once given up on. Subaru then screams, saying that Rem doesn't know anything about him, that this is the kind of man that he is. It all boils over with Subaru openly admitting, after all of his suffering and hardships, that he hates himself. After this, all of his inner thoughts finally pour out as he talks about how he hates that he makes himself sound like a big shot when he can't do anything, which is an insecurity we later learn carried over from the original world he came from. He feels he doesn't do anything, yet he complains like a pro, and that it's amazing that he can live like that and not feel ashamed. Subaru says that he's empty, and that what is the most hard-hitting out of all this is that he tells Rem before he came to this world that he did nothing. He had what he says is all the time and all that freedom, but he did nothing, ever. Subaru is openly admitting that he was a NEET, which means in more American terms that he was unemployed, he wasn't in school or training for a career path, and he was just sitting at his house majority of the time. Subaru was a shut-in in Japan, and he claims that's followed him over to this world and is a result of what he is now. Him wanting to accomplish something when he's accomplished nothing, he says, goes beyond arrogance. The cost of his laziness and wasteful habits end up getting both of them and many more people killed. This is really hard-hitting, and this personally is where I really began to love Subaru. I'd always enjoyed his character, and I have of course found him a little bit relatable. It's hard not to. But it's him spilling out his insecurities that made me realize how much I really do relate to him. He hates that he can't seem to do anything on his own lately. He hates that he is so selfish that his motives, such as whether he cares for Emilia, are always called into question. And he hates the person he used to be in the real world, and how, in his mind, he doesn't think anything has changed. I really can sympathize and understand how he feels. I find it very hard to do anything completely on my own, or at least it seems that way to me. YouTube is a very good example of that. I get a lot of input on almost every step of my process in making videos, which is largely the reason that they take so long to make. It's purely because I am just really insecure of letting people down. So I can understand how Subaru feels in that aspect almost entirely, although it's not exactly a life or death situation on YouTube like it is in rezero. And a large part of my success I don't even really attribute to myself. My most popular video was an Attack on Titan video, and I got help pretty much with everything in that. My friend Sid plugged the video on places for me. He helped me set up the tags, the description. All I did was make it. I didn't do anything else. That video might have done absolutely nothing if it wasn't for Sid. So I can understand how Subaru feels in that aspect almost entirely. I can also understand how he feels about his motives being brought into question often, as I'm often asked or questioned about my true intentions with a lot of things. I talk about it in my Steins Gate video, how I'm probably not the most open with feelings and stuff like that as I could be because of a lot of things that have happened. A good example of motives and intentions and goals is, funnily enough, YouTube again. Although there are more things naturally, but I'm not gonna talk about them here. I want to make videos on YouTube and just in general because my biggest inspiration is Markiplier, and he makes content that will uplift and make his viewers happy. I want to do that. Every video I make has the intention to give insight, make someone laugh or smile with some jokes or maybe some kind of message I have in it, or to have a deeper meaning that someone might need to hear, because I know what it's like to feel alone and to rely on a content creator's videos sometimes. It's not easy to be alone. And sometimes the people might not give you what it is you need to hear. So, I don't know, maybe hearing some random guy on the internet saying it will be better for you. But my motives are called into question often, and I'm usually asked by some people if I truly care about others. Often I am called selfish or self-centered, and that really that really messes with my head quite a bit, because I don't like to think I'm that way. A lot of my goals are not really inherently about myself. It's always with the intention of somebody else in my mind. But what if that's just like a facade, and I'm just thinking that way? You know, those thoughts, because people say those things to me, they get to me quite a lot. Once again, I understand how Subaru feels here. And lastly, he hates who he thinks he used to be, and he believes that nothing has changed between the past and the present versions of himself. I can understand this a lot, probably more than I really want to. As while I can't physically time travel, I often find myself living in the past. I often think about past events or compare myself to how I was in the past or to other people from the past. And I feel like it wouldn't be entirely wrong to say that sometimes I obsess over things that happened in the past. Naturally, there are times that I feel that nothing in me has changed, and that when I look back at where I was, it feels like I'm just in the same place, and that while time has passed, I have not done anything. So again, I understand how Subaru feels here. A big complaint that I see for ReZero is Subaru as a character, and I don't really understand it. He's fragile, he's relatable, and he cares for others, but he also has feelings, and it comes through quite a lot. Subaru is so human. He just might be one of the most realistic portrayals of a person I feel like I've seen in an anime. Like, I wholeheartedly believe I could go out in the world and meet someone just like Subaru. So maybe the complaints are that Subaru is less of a character and more of a human? I'm not really sure. This is probably getting off topic. We'll get back into the video now. Subaru says at his heart that he is just a small, cowardly, filthy piece of trash who's always worried about how others see him, and that nothing about him has changed. This is something else that I find very relatable, which is worrying about other people's perception of who you are. I feel that this is probably something that many people can relate to. It's extremely easy to get lost in thought or to worry about how someone else might view you, since in reality a lot of us just want to be understood and accepted by the people around us. We don't want to be different or ostracized for being a certain way. We just want to be accepted. So it's extremely easy for many of us to sympathize with Subaru here, because, damn, you know, he is one hell of a relatable character. After Subaru says he absolutely hates himself, it's time for Rem to shine once again in this episode, except this time quite literally. Rem begins possibly one of the most impassioned speeches in all of anime here, saying that no matter how deeply he's fallen, he still has the courage to reach out his hands. Which is a great opener here, because the one thing a person needs in an instance like this is reassurance. It takes a lot of strength to open up about your problems, especially if you're extremely conflicted. So it does a hell of a lot of good to let them know that they're doing the right thing, and that they still have a lot of strength in them by showing this action. Rem continues by saying she loves it when he strokes her hair, because it makes her feel as if they can mutually understand each other through his contact between her hair and his hand. Then she proceeds to list many things she loves about him, such as his voice, his eyes, his fingers, the way he walks, the way he sleeps, which is a little creepy, and she describes each thing with every drop of passion and care that she can. Then she says she loves him. Subaru doesn't understand, so Rem clarifies that because he said he hated himself, she wanted to share with him some of the wonderful things she knows about him. Subaru says that it's phony and that Rem doesn't truly know who he is. And that's when Rem snaps, saying that all he knows is him. There is no way he could possibly know the Subaru she knows. This is something else that is really hard-hitting, especially for those of us that care deeply about how other people perceive us. When we hear how deeply someone cares for us, and how the version of us that they see is much better than we think we are, we're confused, maybe even lost a lot of the time. It's like a sudden realization that maybe we're too strict on ourselves, and maybe we're a lot better than we think we are. Rem's line here, I feel, is a beautiful message that a lot of people in the world probably need to hear. Subaru says he's weak and small, and he's running away again as the insert song Wishing performed by Rem's voice actress, begins to creep into the background, which, if you read the lyrics to it, is actually a really gorgeous song. It quite literally is a song sung by Rem on how much she loves Subaru. Rem follows up by saying Subaru is her hero, which definitely will shatter any ounce of worry Subaru would have of being perceived by someone else. This is also the moment that the theater-like direction for this episode really takes over, as Rem is shown in an angelic light, almost like a spotlight actually, with doves flying past to symbolize her pure, undying love. The direction here is nothing short of brilliant, and really helps to bolster the mood for the climax of this episode. This is where what we talked about earlier with episode 11 comes into play, as she recalls back to the dark forest where she didn't know who she was anymore, and all she could do was violently lash out. He saved her. When she woke up and Ram couldn't use any more magic, Subaru created a diversion so that they could escape. He saved her. Despite impossible odds, Subaru marched forward to protect them and came back to her arms, still warm. When he came to, he gave Rem the words she had been wanting to hear for the longest time. And it came from the person that seemingly threw his life away several times for her safety. Her time was frozen for so long, ever since the night of the witches' cult attack. Rem says that she believes that no matter what happens, and even if he feels like he'll lose, and that even if somebody else turns their back on him and they don't want to believe in him, that she will always believe in him. And despite how much he had given up or felt that no one in the world cared for him, Rem shattered his illusion and kissed him on the forehead. He says that no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't save anyone. Rem says she's right here and that he saved her. He says he's never done anything, that he's empty and no one will listen to him. Rem says she's right here and will listen to anything he has to say. He says no one expects anything from him, no one believes in him, and he hates himself. Subaru here is realizing what a lot of people that are depressed and short of love eventually come to have. A person that will love and care for you unconditionally exists out there in the world. That despite how much you may live in the past, or have regrets, or concerns, or insecurities, or maybe even hate yourself, someone will always love you, will always support you, and will always be there for you. Rem then says if you cannot forgive yourself for being empty and having nothing, then let us start from here. Subaru asks her what she means, but she replies by saying that just like when time was stopped for her, they will make the time that he feels has stopped for him start up again. The realization Subaru has here is unlike anyone that he has had ever before, and the symbolic meaning behind these simple lines for Ren are immense. Before, Subaru would have to die if he had ever hoped to start things over again. But now, right here, he can start over again without dying. Instead of the cold embrace of death, he is met with the warm love of Rem. Rem allowed him to return from the dead without dying. She then references episode 11 by saying that they will lean on each other and support each other, and says to show how awesome he can be. What he says next is a line that has been memed into absolute oblivion. I understand that this upset a lot of people, but for me, an absolute Rem diehard, this scene made sense to me. Rem was expressing her love for Subaru, yes, but she was also returning the favor of his kindness that Subaru paid her earlier in the show. She knew he loved Emilia, yet she put her feelings out there. Subaru's confession of love for Emilia to Rem is not necessarily a slap in the face, but more like the truth that she deserves to hear. Anyone that spills out their hearts deserves to hear the truth. Subaru made the very human and mature decision of doing the right thing here instead of leading her on. I also think it's important to note that the anime left out something that is crucial from the light novels, which is that Subaru loves both Emilia and Rem almost equally, but Emilia is just a little bit more loved than Rem is. So Subaru saying "I love Emilia" is more so a clarification than an outright rejection. Think of it more like the lines of him saying that he understands she likes him, but at this current point in time, Emilia is still his number one. Subaru cannot control who he likes, and it would be cruel and dishonest to Rem if he said he loved her when he's still in love with Emilia. If I were in Subaru's shoes, and a girl professed her love to me while I didn't feel the same way, I obviously would not agree to love her because I would be leading her on, and leading somebody on is pretty shitty. So yes, while it is a little saddening that Subaru didn't share feelings with Rem, I think ignoring the rest of the themes and messages of this episode and episodes leading up to it is rather stupid. This is why Rem says yes, since she likely knew that this is what his answer would be. After this, Subaru realizes the error in his ways with his motives for Emilia, and that he wants to save her. Subaru then asks for Rem's help, opening more up about his weaknesses, and says he wants Rem to walk beside him. They then both joke about how Subaru asks this after rejecting Rem, and that this is also hard for Subaru since Rem rejected his once-in-a-lifetime proposal. It's nice to see them laughing together about the future after everything that just transpired. Rem accepts his proposal, saying she'll do anything for her hero, and then Subaru hugs her, telling her that she has a front row seat. With him watching Emilia and Rem watching him, he has no time to look downward, and it's time for his story to start right here, from zero. Subaru finally was able to realize how important and how much he affected the life of someone he cared about, and he was able to break many of his insecurities. While he might not be able to love himself immediately, Rem has helped to set him on the right track to become the best version of himself that he will become. What follows after this episode in Arc 3 is one of the most satisfying and enjoyable turn of events and conclusions that I have seen in an anime, as Subaru shows how much he's learned from every mistake he's made, and he truly does become an awesome hero and save everyone. I'm not going to get too much into it because, well, I don't want to spoil it for those that haven't seen what happens yet. If you haven't, you're in for a ride, trust me. Subaru has shown how relatable and human he can be in this episode, and I hope that episode 18 was able to deliver as powerful of a message to those that have seen it as it was able to do for me. It is seriously one of my favorite episodes of all time, and I've really enjoyed myself while making this video. Well, speaking of this video, that about does it for almost everything that I really wanted to talk about here. Just like the Angel Beats video, God of High School video, Steins Gate video, and episode 15 of ReZero video, this episode 18 video was one that I'd been planning to make for a very long time, and I'm really happy to have finally finished it and seen this goal of mine come to a close. I also really enjoy these videos where I can be a little bit more open and vulnerable about things because, it's nice to put yourself out there. Even though, many people might not watch this or might not get this far, still, it's just nice to know that maybe somebody out there got something they really needed to hear from this video. I don't know, maybe I might just be rambling though. The next in line after this for ReZero is my video about episode 29, which is Parent and Child, another really hard-hitting and very important episode. So, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to Matt for supporting me on Patreon, man. I really appreciate you. It's crazy how you're the only one left now, but still, I appreciate your continued support. And I'll see you guys all in the next video.